The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the narrow trail winding through the Colorado Rockies as Winona Davies clutched the reins of her borrowed mare with white-knuckled determination, knowing that if she did not reach Durango before nightfall, she would be sleeping on the mountain with nothing but her thin shawl and the haunting memory of her father's last words echoing through her mind. It was late August in the year 1872, and the summer heat still clung to the high country, despite the elevation. Winona had left Kansas City 3 weeks prior with a wagon train that promised safe passage to the mining towns of Colorado, but that promise had shattered like cheap glass when half the party decided to push north toward Denver instead. The remaining travelers had scattered at the last supply station, each going their separate ways, and Winona found herself alone with only enough coin for this horse and 2 days' worth of provisions. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving behind debts that consumed everything except the deed to a small property outside Durango that he had won in a card game years before. It was her only hope, her only remaining connection to anything resembling security. At 22 years old, Winona had worked as a seamstress in Kansas City, living in a cramped boarding house where the walls were paper-thin and the landlady's suspicion was thick. When the debts came calling, she had nothing left to lose by heading west. The mare stumbled on a loose stone, and Winona jerked forward in the saddle, her heart hammering. She was not an experienced rider. Her hands were made for threading needles, not controlling half-wild animals on treacherous mountain paths. The trail had narrowed considerably in the last hour, with steep drops opening up on her right side that made her stomach clench every time she dared to glance down. "Just keep moving," she whispered to the horse, though her voice sounded small against the vast wilderness surrounding them. Just a few more hours. The sun dipped lower, painting the pine trees in shades of amber and gold. Winona tried to focus on the beauty rather than her growing fear. She had read about the Rocky Mountains in newspapers, had seen crude illustrations, but nothing prepared her for the reality of these towering peaks that seemed to scrape the sky itself. The air was thinner up here, making each breath feel insufficient, and the temperature was already beginning to drop as evening approached. She rounded a bend and pulled the mare to an abrupt halt. The trail ahead had partially collapsed, leaving a gap of maybe 4 feet where the path simply ceased to exist before continuing on the other side. Below the gap, the mountain fell away into shadow and rock. Winona's mouth went dry. She could probably lead the horse around if she went higher up the slope, but the terrain looked unstable, covered in loose scree that might give way under their combined weight. Her hands trembled as she considered her options. Going back would add hours to her journey, possibly forcing her to spend the night on the mountain after all. Going forward meant risking both their lives on uncertain ground. While she sat frozen with indecision, a voice called out from somewhere above her on the slope. "You planning to sit there until winter, or you want some help?" Winona jerked her head up, searching for the source. At first, she saw nothing but trees and rock. Then movement caught her eye, and a figure emerged from between 2 massive boulders about 20 yards up the mountainside. Even from this distance, she could tell he was large, built like the rough-hewn logs that made up frontier cabins, all solid muscle and raw strength. He descended the slope with the sure-footed confidence of someone who had walked these mountains his entire life. As he drew closer, Winona took in more details despite herself. He wore buckskin trousers and a shirt that had seen better days, with sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a leather cord. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but it did nothing to hide the sharp intelligence in his eyes, which were the color of creek water in sunlight, somewhere between blue and gray. He was the most physically imposing man Winona had ever seen, and for a moment she forgot to be afraid of the mountain because she was suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was, alone with a stranger in the wilderness. But when he spoke again, his voice carried no threat, only a straightforward practicality that put her somewhat at ease. "That section washed out in the spring rains," he said, nodding toward the gap. "Most folks don't know about it yet. The main road into Durango is about 3 miles east, follows the valley." "I must have missed the turn," Winona managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am trying to reach Durango before dark." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her travel-stained dress, the quality mare that was clearly borrowed or rented, and the small pack tied behind her saddle that spoke of either poverty or poor planning. His expression softened slightly. "You are not going to make it before dark, not unless you sprout wings," he said. "But I can get you around this gap," and pointed toward the valley road. "From there, it is a straight shot into town, maybe 2 hours in the daylight. 4 or 5 if you are traveling by moonlight." Winona swallowed hard. The thought of riding strange mountain trails in the dark made her want to weep, but she held the tears back through sheer force of will. She had not cried when her father died, had not cried when the bank took their house, and she would not cry now in front of this stranger. "I would appreciate any help you could offer," she said carefully. The man nodded and moved toward the mare, who surprisingly did not shy away from him. He placed one large hand on the animal's neck, stroking gently, and Winona noticed his hands were scarred and weathered, but moved with careful precision. "I am going to lead her up and around," he explained. "You can walk or ride, your choice, but walking might be easier on your nerves if you are not used to rough terrain." Winona dismounted gratefully, her legs wobbling slightly when her feet hit solid ground. The man took the reins without further comment and began guiding the mare up the slope, testing each step before committing his weight. Winona followed, trying to place her feet exactly where he placed his, and was surprised to find the path he chose was more stable than it looked. They moved slowly, carefully, working their way around the collapsed section of trail. The man did not speak, focused entirely on the task, and Winona found herself studying him despite her better judgment. His shoulders were impossibly broad, stretching the fabric of his worn shirt, and his movements had an economy to them that spoke of someone who did not waste effort. Everything about him suggested competence and strength. When they reached the far side of the gap and descended back to the trail, Winona released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done." The man handed back her reins, and their fingers brushed briefly. His skin was warm and rough with calluses. "You would have figured something out," he said, though his tone suggested he doubted she would have figured out anything good. "The valley road is straight ahead about half a mile. When you hit a fork, stay left. It will take you right into Durango." He started to turn away, clearly considering his duty done, but Winona heard herself speak before she could think better of it. "What is your name?" He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Kade Kerrigan. I am Winona Davies." "Thank you again, Mr. Kerrigan." Something flickered across his face at her formal address, almost like amusement, but he simply nodded and began climbing back up the slope toward wherever he had come from. Winona remounted the mare and continued down the trail, but she found herself looking back more than once until Kade Kerrigan disappeared from sight among the rocks and trees. True to his word, she found the fork and stayed left as instructed. The trail widened into a proper road, and as the sun touched the horizon, the valley opened up before her with the town of Durango spread out along the Animas River like a scatter of matchboxes. Relief flooded through her so intensely that she actually felt dizzy. She reached the edge of town as full darkness fell, and the lights from windows and street lamps guided her toward what looked like the main street. Durango was larger than she had expected, bustling with evening activity despite the late hour. She could hear piano music drifting from a saloon, the sound of men's laughter, horses stamping and snorting at hitching posts. Winona found a livery stable and negotiated with the owner to return the mare to the rental station in the morning, paying the last of her small coins for the service. Then she stood on the wooden sidewalk with her single bag and tried to formulate a plan. The property her father had left was somewhere outside town, but she had no map, no specific directions, only a vague description from the lawyer's letter that had reached her in Kansas City. She would need to visit the land office in the morning, assuming she could find it. For tonight, she needed shelter. The problem was she had no money left for a hotel. The last of her funds had gone to the livery. She had a little food in her pack, some bread and dried meat that was probably growing stale, but nowhere to sleep. Winona walked slowly down the main street, trying to appear purposeful rather than lost. Men tipped their hats to her, and a few women glanced her way with curiosity. She must have looked travel-worn and out of place, her dark hair escaping its pins, dust coating her green dress. She found a quiet spot between two buildings and sat down on her bag, leaning against the wall. It was not ideal, but it would have to do for one night. Tomorrow she would sort everything out. Tomorrow she would find her property and figure out what to do next. But as she sat there in the shadows, watching the town move around her, Winona felt the tears she had been holding back finally break free. They came silently, running down her cheeks as she pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle any sound. Everything felt overwhelming suddenly. The weight of her father's death, the loss of her home, the terrifying journey west, the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. She cried herself out quietly, then wiped her face with her sleeves and forced herself to breathe slowly. Crying solved nothing. Action solved things. And tomorrow she would take action. Winona must have dozed off despite her intention to stay alert, because she jerked awake to the sound of shouting and breaking glass. A fight had spilled out of the nearby saloon, two men grappling in the street while others cheered them on. She shrank further into the shadows, making herself small. The fight ended with both men too drunk to continue, and the crowd dispersed. Silence settled over the street again, broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the distant sound of the river. Winona hugged her knees to her chest and watched the stars overhead, so bright and numerous they almost did not look real. In Kansas City, the stars were pale and scattered, dimmed by coal smoke and city lights. Here in the mountains, they blazed like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Despite everything, she felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. Morning came cold and bright. Winona stood stiffly, her body aching from sleeping against a wall, and brushed the dust from her dress as best she could. She used some of her precious water to wash her face and hands at a public pump, then braided her hair neatly and pinned it up. Appearances mattered, especially when you were a woman alone trying to establish yourself in a new place. The land office opened at 8 o'clock. Winona was waiting on the steps when the clerk arrived, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles who looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "I am looking for information about a property," Winona said firmly. "It belonged to my late father, Thomas Davies. I have the deed." She produced the folded paper from her bag, and the clerk took it with obvious reluctance. He studied it for a long moment, his lips pursed. "Davies' property," he muttered. "Yes, I know this one, about 6 miles north of town, up in the foothills. There is a cabin on it, though I could not tell you what condition it is in. Your father won the property off a prospector named Hicks about 5 years back, but nobody has lived there in at least that long." 6 miles. Winona's heart sank. "Is there a road to it?" "More of a trail, really. You will need a horse or a wagon. Do you have transportation, Miss Davies?" "I will arrange something," Winona said, trying to sound confident. The clerk gave her directions, which she memorized carefully, then returned her deed with a shrug. "Good luck. That is rough country for a woman alone." Winona left the office with her jaw set. Everyone kept commenting on her being alone, as if she had any choice in the matter. She would manage because she had to manage. She spent most of the morning walking around Durango, trying to understand the layout of the town and making discreet inquiries about how one might hire a wagon for a day. The prices quoted to her were far beyond her non-existent funds. By noon, she was sitting on a bench near the general store, hungry and frustrated, and trying to figure out her next move. "You look like someone who could use a decent meal." Winona looked up sharply to find Kade Kerrigan standing in front of her, blocking out the sun. He looked different in town, more out of place somehow, as if civilization did not quite fit him the way the wilderness did. But he was no less imposing, his broad shoulders and muscular frame drawing glances from passers-by. "Mr. Kerrigan," she said, surprised, "I did not expect to see you again." "I come into town once a month for supplies," he said. "Saw you sitting here looking like the world just handed you a raw deal." Winona tried to smile, but it felt brittle, "Just contemplating my circumstances." Kade studied her with those sharp gray-blue eyes, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he saw right through her attempt at composure. "Have you eaten today?" he asked bluntly. "I have some bread in my bag." "That is not an answer." He gestured toward a small restaurant across the street. "Come on. You can tell me about these circumstances over something hot." Winona wanted to refuse on principle. She did not take charity, especially not from strange men, but her stomach growled audibly at that moment, betraying her, and Kade raised one eyebrow. "I am not going to bite," he said. "Just offering a meal to someone who helped me remember what it is like to talk to another human being for a few minutes." That surprised a real smile out of her. "I helped you? You asked my name," he said simply. "Most people don't bother anymore." Winona found herself standing and following him across the street before she had fully decided to accept. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered curtains and the smell of frying bacon thick in the air. Kade gestured to a corner table and they sat down. A plump woman with graying hair emerged from the kitchen, and her face lit up when she saw Kade. "Well, I will be blessed. Kade Kerrigan in my establishment 2 times in 1 year. Should I alert the newspaper?" "Hello, Mrs. Patterson," Kade said, and Winona could hear the warmth in his voice. "2 of whatever you are serving today, please. Beef stew and fresh bread, and I will not hear any argument about it." Mrs. Patterson turned her bright eyes on Winona. "And who might you be, dear?" "Winona Davies, madam. I just arrived in Durango yesterday." "Davies? Oh, you must be Tom Davies's daughter. I heard you might be coming." "Such a shame about your father. Dear, he was a character, that one." Mrs. Patterson patted Winona's shoulder sympathetically before bustling back to the kitchen. Winona looked at Kade in surprise. "Did you know my father?" "Met him once or twice," Kade said. "He came through town occasionally. Liked his whiskey and his cards." "That sounds like him," Winona said softly. The stew arrived, steaming hot, rich with vegetables and tender chunks of beef that melted on Winona's tongue. She had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating, and she had to force herself to slow down and maintain some decorum. Kade ate in comfortable silence, not pushing her to talk, and Winona appreciated that more than she could express. When they were both finished, Mrs. Patterson brought coffee, and Winona wrapped her hands around the warm cup gratefully. "So what are these circumstances you are contemplating?" Kade asked. Winona hesitated, but something about his steady presence made her want to be honest. "I came to Durango because my father left me a property. I found out this morning it is 6 miles north of town, and I have no way to get there and no money to hire transportation. I also have no money for lodging, which is why I spent last night between 2 buildings on Main Street." Kade's expression darkened. "You slept on the street? I did not have much choice." "There are always choices," he said, then shook his head. "Sorry, that is not helpful. What are you planning to do? Walk, I suppose. 6 miles is manageable if I start early. I am more worried about what I will find when I get there. The clerk said nobody has lived on the property in years." "That would be the old Hicks place," Kade said slowly. "I know it. The cabin is still standing, last I saw, but it is going to need work. You know where it is? I live about 3 miles from there. Your property borders mine on the south side." Winona's eyes widened. "We are going to be neighbors. Seems that way." Kade was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking something through. Then he said, "I am heading back to my place this afternoon. I can take you with me, drop you at your property on the way. I could not ask you to do that. You did not ask. I am offering, but why would you help me? You don't know me." Kade met her eyes directly. "Because I know what it is like to be alone in hard country with nobody to turn to. Because you are going to be my neighbor, and it makes sense to start things off right. And because if you walk 6 miles alone and something happens, I will hear about it eventually, see, and feel like a heel for not helping when I could have." The honesty in his answer disarmed her completely. Winona found herself nodding. "Then I accept with gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Kerrigan." "Kade," he corrected. "If we are going to be neighbors, you might as well use my name." "Then you should call me Winona." He nodded, and something in the air between them shifted slightly, became less formal. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. They left the restaurant after Kade insisted on paying for both meals, and he led her to a wagon loaded with supplies that was hitched to 2 sturdy horses outside the general store. He had clearly been in town for a while, making his monthly purchases. "You can ride in the back with the supplies or up front with me," he said. "Your choice." "I will ride up front if that is acceptable." Kade helped her up onto the wooden bench seat, his hand firm and steady on her arm, and Winona was acutely aware of strength. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, and the wagon lurched into motion. They drove through Durango and out the north end of town, following a road that quickly turned into a rutted trail climbing into the foothills. The motion of the wagon was rough but not unbearable, and Winona held onto the edge of the seat to steady herself. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. "About 8 years. Came out from Missouri after the war. You fought?" "For a while." His tone suggested he did not want to elaborate, and Winona let it drop. "What do you do up here?" "Trap in the winter, hunt year-round. Sell the furs and meat in town. I have a garden and some chickens, keep to myself mostly." "That sounds lonely." Kade shrugged. "Lonely is not the same as alone. I like the quiet. People are complicated." "They are," Winona agreed, "but they can also be kind. Like you have been to me." He glanced at her sidelong, and she thought she saw the hint of a smile beneath his beard. "Don't make me out to be some kind of saint. I am just helping a neighbor." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon climbing steadily. The forest closed in around them, pine and aspen creating walls of green and white. Winona could hear birds singing and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The air smelled clean and sharp, so different from the coal smoke stench of Kansas City. After about an hour, Kade slowed the horses and pointed to a narrow trail branching off to the right. "That is the path to your place. It is another quarter-mile or so. The cabin is in a clearing at the end." He turned the wagon down the trail, and they bounced along slowly, branches occasionally scraping the sides. Then the trees opened up, and Winona saw her new home for the first time. The cabin was small, maybe 15 feet by 20, built from rough-hewn logs that had weathered to a silvery gray. The roof looked intact, which was a mercy, though several shingles were missing. The windows had shutters but no glass, and the door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Tall grass and weeds surrounded the structure, dotted with wildflowers that added splashes of color. Behind the cabin, the forest rose up steep and dense. To the left, a small creek ran through the property, its water clear and cold-looking. It was isolated and wild and completely overwhelming. Kade brought the wagon to a halt and sat quietly, letting her absorb it all. "It needs work," he said finally, "but the bones are good. Your father could have done a lot worse in a card game." Winona climbed down from the wagon before she could let herself feel the panic rising in her chest. She walked toward the cabin slowly, her skirt swishing through the grass. The door opened with a loud creak, and she stepped inside. It was dim and musty-smelling, but not as bad as she had feared. There was a stone fireplace along one wall, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a bed frame in the corner that had no mattress. Shelves lined another wall, empty except for dust and mouse droppings. The floor was packed dirt, but solid. She heard Kade's footsteps behind her, and then his voice, carefully neutral. "The roof looks sound. That is the most important thing. You will need to clean it thoroughly. Get a mattress and some basic supplies. The creek has good water year-round. You will need to dig an outhouse. Set up some kind of fence if you want to keep animals. Plant a garden before the season ends completely." The list felt endless, impossible. Winona turned to face him, and whatever he saw in her expression made him soften slightly. "You don't have to do it all at once," he said. "First priority is making it livable. Getting a proper door latch, patching any holes where cold air or animals could get in, setting up a cooking area. The rest can come gradually." "I don't know how to do any of those things," Winona admitted. "I am a seamstress, not a carpenter." "Then you learn," Kade said simply, "and I'd live close enough to lend a hand with the heavy work if you need it." "Why would you do that?" He looked at her for a long moment, and Winona felt the weight of his gaze. "Because you are going to need help, and I am the closest person. Because I remember what it was like to start from nothing. And because it is the right thing to do." Tears pricked at Winona's eyes again, but she blinked them back furiously. "I cannot pay you. I am not asking for payment. Neighbors help neighbors. That is how things work out here." He walked past her and began inspecting the fireplace, checking the flue and testing the stability of the stones. Winona watched him work, this large, quiet man who had appeared in her life like some kind of answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. "The chimney needs cleaning, but it is structurally sound," Kade said. "You will be able to have fires without smoking yourself out. That is good, because winter comes early and hard up here." He moved around the small space with easy confidence, pointing out what needed immediate attention and what could wait. Winona listened, trying to absorb the information, but part of her was simply grateful not to be facing this alone. When he finished his inspection, Kade said, "I am going to unload a few things from my wagon that you can borrow. A blanket, some basic tools, a lantern. You can return them when you get your own." "Kade, I cannot take your things. You are not taking them, you are borrowing them. There is a difference." He went back outside before she could argue further. Winona followed him out and watched as he pulled items from the wagon, setting them on the ground near the cabin door. A thick wool blanket, a hammer and saw, a kerosene lantern with a can of fuel, a small pot and a frying pan, a sack of flour and another of dried beans, a tin of coffee. "This is too much," she protested. "This is survival," he corrected. "You can pay me back eventually if it makes you feel better, but right now you need these things more than I do." He carried everything inside and arranged it neatly on the shelves. Then he stood in the center of the cabin, hands on his hips, looking around with a critical eye. "I will come back tomorrow with some lumber to fix that door and patch the window shutters. Bring my tools. We can get the place secure at least. Kade, you have your own work to do." "I do, and I will do it. But this will only take a few hours, and it needs doing." He turned to face her directly. "Listen, Winona, I know you are proud and independent, and that is good. But pride will not keep you warm when winter comes, and independence will not fix a broken door. Let people help when help is offered. It does not make you weak. It makes you smart." Winona felt something crack open inside her chest, some hard shell she had built around herself to survive the past months. "Thank you," she whispered, "truly." Kade nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the depth of emotion in her voice. "Get yourself settled tonight. Clean what you can. I will be back in the morning." He left, and Winona heard the wagon rumbling back down the trail toward the main path. Then she was alone with her new home and the overwhelming task ahead of her. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. She found an old broom in the corner and swept the floors, raising clouds of dust that made her cough. She wiped down the shelves and the table with a rag dampened in creek water. She cleared away the mouse droppings and the accumulated debris of years of neglect. By the time darkness fell, the cabin looked marginally better. Winona made a simple dinner of beans cooked in the pot over a fire she managed to coax to life in the fireplace. She ate sitting on the front step, watching the stars emerge, and felt the exhaustion of the past few days finally catch up with her. She made up a bed of sorts using the blanket Kade had lent her, spreading it over the bare bed frame. It was not comfortable, but it was better than sleeping on the ground. As she lay there in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night, Winona thought about Kade Kerrigan. He was unlike any man she had known in Kansas City. There was a straightforward honesty to him, a lack of pretense that she found refreshing. He did not try to impress her or make conversation for its own sake. He simply did what needed doing and moved on. And yet there was kindness in his actions, a quiet generosity that touched her more deeply than flowery words ever could. She fell asleep thinking about the way his hands had moved with such careful precision and the steadiness in his gray-blue eyes. True to his word, Kade arrived mid-morning the next day with a wagon loaded with lumber, tools, and various supplies. Winona was already up and had been attempting to figure out how to repair the crooked door when she heard him coming up the trail. "Morning," he called out, jumping down from the wagon seat. He wore the same buckskin trousers and worn shirt from yesterday, and his long hair was tied back. In the bright morning sunlight, Winona could see that he was younger than she had first thought, probably only about 28 or 29. The beard and the weathered look of someone who lived outdoors had made him seem older. "Good morning," Winona replied, brushing her hands on her skirt. She had been up since dawn, continuing the cleaning and trying to make the cabin more livable. "You did not have to come so early. Wanted to get the work done while the day is cool," Kade said. He began unloading lumber, stacking it neatly near the cabin. "How was your first night?" "Quiet," Winona said honestly. "Strange, but not unpleasant. The forest makes interesting sounds. You get used to it. Eventually you will be able to tell a deer from a bear just by the way they move through the underbrush. That sounds like a useful skill." Kade grinned, a flash of white teeth beneath his beard, and Winona felt something flutter in her stomach. He had a nice smile, transforming his serious face into something warmer. "Let me look at that door." he said, setting down a toolbox. Winona stepped back and let him work. She watched as he examined the hinges, tested the frame, and then began making adjustments. His movements were efficient and sure, each action purposeful. Within an hour, the door hung straight and closed properly, with a new latch that clicked securely into place. "There," Kade said with satisfaction. "Now nobody is walking in uninvited. I hardly think that is a concern all the way out here." "Bears don't knock," Kade said dryly. "And there are mountain lions in these hills." A good door is not optional. That sobering thought made Winona grateful all over again for his help. She had not even considered predators. They worked together through the morning and into the afternoon. Kade repaired the window shutters, replacing rotted wood and adding strong latches. He patched several spots in the roof where shingles were missing. Winona helped where she could, holding boards steady and handing him tools, learning the names of things and the way they fit together. At midday, she made coffee and served it with some of the bread she had baked that morning, using the flour Kade had given her. They sat on the front step drinking it, and Winona realized she was enjoying herself despite the hard work. There was something satisfying about seeing immediate results from physical labor. "Your cabin is about 3 miles northeast of here," she asked, "give or take." "On the other side of that ridge." Kade pointed to a line of trees marking higher elevation. "Takes about 40 minutes to walk it, less if you know the shortcuts. Do you get lonely up there by yourself?" He considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but I spent enough time surrounded by people during the war that I needed the quiet afterward." After a while, you realize that being alone is not the same as being lonely. "I have my routines, my work. It is enough." "What about family? Do you have anyone back in Missouri?" Cade's expression closed slightly. "Had parents. They both passed during the war. No siblings. No wife or children, just me." Winona heard the finality in his tone and recognized pain when she saw it. "I am sorry. That must be difficult. It was a long time ago." He stood, clearly done with the conversation. "Let me check the foundation before the light goes." He walked around the perimeter of the cabin, examining where the logs met the ground, occasionally crouching to get a better look. Winona watched him, noting the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the raw physical power in his frame. He was built like someone who had spent his entire life doing hard manual labor, all lean strength and endurance. When he completed his circuit, Kade nodded to himself. "Foundation is solid. This cabin will last another 50 years if you maintain it properly." "I will do my best," Winona said. "I know you will." He started gathering his tools. "I am going to head back before dark. You should be secure here now. Keep the door latched at night. Keep the fire going if it gets cold." "Kade, wait." Winona stepped closer, trying to find words adequate to express her gratitude. "I know I keep saying thank you, but I truly mean it. You have done more for me in 2 days than most people would do for family. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to repay me." Kade paused, then added, "But if you are determined to balance the scales, you could come to dinner at my place tomorrow evening. I am a decent cook, and it would be nice to have company for a change." Winona felt her heartbeat quicken. It was just dinner, just neighbors being neighborly. But something in the way he looked at her when he asked made it feel like more. "I would like that," she said softly. "Good. Come by around sunset. Follow the trail northeast. It is pretty clear. If you get lost, just listen for the chickens. They make a racket when they hear someone coming." He loaded his tools into the wagon and climbed up onto the seat. Before he could drive away, Winona called out, "How do I get to your place?" "You said follow the trail northeast, but I don't know where the trail starts." Kade pointed to a break in the trees on the north side of her clearing. "There. It is not much of a trail yet, but you will see where feet have worn the grass down. Follows the creek for a while, then cuts up over the ridge. You cannot miss it." "All right, I will see you tomorrow then." He nodded and clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon rolled away, and Winona watched until it disappeared into the forest. The next day passed slowly. Winona continued organizing the cabin, making lists in her mind of what she still needed. She had no furniture beyond the table and chairs, no proper bedding, no cookware beyond what Kade had loaned her. She needed supplies for sewing if she was going to earn any money, needed seeds if she wanted to plant a garden, needed a dozen other things she could not afford. But the cabin was secure now, and that was something. She had shelter, she had water from the creek, and she had at least one neighbor who seemed willing to help her get established. As sunset approached, Winona changed into her other dress, the only one she owned that was not stained with travel and work. It was a simple blue cotton, practical rather than pretty, but it was clean and pressed. She braided her dark hair and pinned it up carefully, studying her reflection in the small hand mirror she had brought from Kansas City. She looked tired, she thought, but not as defeated as she had a few days ago. She followed Kade's directions, finding the trail exactly where he said it would be. The walk was beautiful in the evening light, with long shadows stretching through the trees and birds singing their last songs before night. The trail followed the creek, just as he had described, the water burbling over rocks and creating a pleasant background music. Then the path climbed, and Winona found herself slightly out of breath as she crested the ridge. On the other side, the land sloped down into another valley, and she could see Kade's property spread out below. His cabin was larger than hers, probably twice the size, with a stone chimney and glass windows that glowed with warm light from inside. There was a barn or shed of some kind, a chicken coop where she could indeed hear birds making noise, and a garden plot that was still producing vegetables despite the lateness of the season. Everything was neat and well maintained, speaking of someone who took pride in his work. Winona walked down the slope toward the cabin, and the door opened before she reached it. Kade stood in the doorway, backlit by firelight, and Winona's breath caught slightly. He had cleaned up, trimmed his beard slightly, and changed into a fresh shirt. His hair was still damp, as if he had washed in the creek recently. "You made it," he said, and she could hear the pleasure in his voice. "Come on in." The interior of his cabin was cozy and surprisingly well appointed. There was a real bed in one corner with a thick quilt, shelves lined with books and tools, a rocking chair by the fireplace. The fire itself blazed cheerfully, and something smelled delicious cooking over it. "This is lovely," Winona said sincerely. "You have made a real home here." "I have been at it for 8 years," Kade reminded her. "You will get there too, give it time." He gestured for her to sit at the table, which was already set with 2 plates and cups. "I made venison stew and biscuits. Hope that is all right." "It sounds wonderful." Kade served the meal, and Winona had to admit it was delicious. The venison was tender and flavorful, the biscuits light and buttery. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Winona found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months. "How did you learn to cook like this?" she asked. "Necessity," Kade said with a shrug. "When you live alone, you either learn or you eat poorly. I got tired of eating poorly. It is a useful skill, so is sewing. I am terrible at it. Spent half my first winter here with torn clothes because I could not figure out how to stitch them properly." Winona laughed. "If you ever need mending done, I would be happy to help. Consider it payment for all the repairs you have done to my cabin." "That is a fair trade," Kade agreed. After dinner, they sat by the fire drinking coffee, and the conversation flowed more easily than Winona had expected. Kade was not a big talker, but when he did speak, it was thoughtful and interesting. He told her about the wildlife in the area, the changing seasons, the best places to hunt and fish. She told him about Kansas City, about her work as a seamstress, about her father's slow decline after her mother died. "He was never the same after she passed," Winona said quietly. "Lost interest in everything except drinking and gambling. I tried to hold things together, but there was only so much I could do." "That is a heavy burden for a daughter," Kade said. "I loved him even when he was difficult. He was still my father. He must have been proud of you, coming all the way out here to make something of the property he left you." Winona smiled sadly. "I don't know if pride is what he would have felt. He never thought much of my capabilities. But I am going to prove him wrong, even if he is not here to see it." "You will," Kade said with conviction. "You have got the spine for it, I can tell." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. As the evening wore on, Winona realized she did not want to leave. It was comfortable here, safe, and Kade's quiet presence was more soothing than any amount of solitude. But she stood eventually, knowing she needed to get back before it was fully dark. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "It was wonderful to have someone to talk to." "You are welcome any time," Kade said, and she could tell he meant it. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something." "Yes?" He seemed slightly uncomfortable, which was unusual for him, I need to dig a new outhouse. The old one is full and needs to be properly closed up. I was planning to do it this week, and I thought, well, you are going to need one too. Might as well dig two while I am at it. Save you the trouble. Winona blinked in surprise. An outhouse was not exactly a romantic topic, but it was certainly a practical necessity. That is very kind, but it seems like too much work to ask of you. I am not asking, I am offering. It is heavy digging, not something you could do easily on your own, and honestly, it would save time to do both at once. Winona thought about the small latrine area she had been using behind her cabin, nothing more than a hole in the ground with some privacy branches around it. A proper outhouse would be a vast improvement. If you are sure it is not too much trouble, then yes, I would be very grateful. Good. I will come by day after tomorrow with my tools. Should have both done within a day. He walked her to the edge of his property, pointing out the trail in the gathering darkness. You can see the lights from your cabin from here if you look. Just head toward those and you will be fine. I will be careful, Winona promised. I know you will. They stood there for a moment, and Winona was acutely aware of how close he was, the solid warmth of him. She had the strangest urge to reach out and touch his arm, to maintain some physical connection to this man who had become so important to her so quickly, but she simply said goodnight and started down the trail. When she looked back once, Kade was still standing there, watching to make sure she made it safely. 2 days later, Kade arrived early in the morning with a wagon full of tools and lumber. True to his word, he spent the entire day digging and building. Winona helped where she could, but mostly she watched in awe as he worked. The physical labor was intense. Kade dug a deep pit behind her cabin, far enough from the house and the creek to be sanitary, his muscles straining with each shovelful of earth. Sweat soaked his shirt, and eventually he pulled it off, working bare-chested in the morning sun. Winona tried not to stare, but it was difficult. His body was extraordinary, all hard muscle and power, his skin tanned and scarred in places. He moved with the steady rhythm of someone who knew his own strength, never wasting motion, never complaining. He built the outhouse frame with quick efficiency, his hands sure with hammer and nails. By late afternoon, a small but sturdy structure stood behind Winona's cabin, complete with a door and a little crescent moon cut into the wood for ventilation. There, Kade said with satisfaction, pulling his shirt back on, that should last you years. I don't know what to say, Winona said honestly. You built me an outhouse before I even had to ask for help. That is significant. Kade looked at her, and something in his expression was different, softer. Out here, you take care of the people around you. That is just how it is done. And you are someone worth taking care of. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Winona felt her cheeks flush, and she looked down at her hands. Thank you, Kade, for everything. You are welcome. He packed up his tools and prepared to leave, but Winona found herself not wanting him to go. Over the past week, she had grown accustomed to his presence, had started looking forward to seeing him. He was steady and reliable and kind, and she realized with a start that she was developing feelings for him that went beyond simple gratitude. Would you like to stay for dinner? She asked impulsively. It is the least I can do, and I made a stew that is actually edible. Kade smiled. I would like that. They ate together at her small table, and the conversation flowed easily. Afterward, they sat outside on the step watching the stars emerge, and Kade pointed out constellations, teaching her their names and stories. My mother used to tell me about the stars, he said quietly. She said they were the campfires of travelers who had gone before us, lighting the way so we would not get lost. That is a beautiful thought, Winona said. She was a beautiful person. I miss her. Winona reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm and calloused, and he turned his hand over to lace his fingers through hers. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the darkness, neither speaking but both, feeling the connection growing between them. When Kade finally stood to leave, he looked down at her with an expression that made her heart race. Can I come by tomorrow? Just to visit, not to work. I would like that, Winona said softly. He squeezed her hand once more, then released it and walked off into the night toward his own cabin. Winona sat alone for a while longer, replaying the evening in her mind. She had come to Colorado expecting hardship and loneliness, expecting to struggle alone to build a life. She had not expected Kade Kerrigan, this mountain of a man with gentle hands and a kind heart. She realized, sitting there under the stars with the memory of his touch still warm on her skin, that she was falling in love with him. The thought should have scared her. They had known each other less than 2 weeks, but nothing about this felt rushed or wrong. It felt natural, like recognizing something she had been searching for without knowing it. The next day, Kade arrived in the late afternoon carrying a freshly caught trout and a jar of honey. "Thought you might like fresh fish for dinner," he said. "That sounds perfect." They prepared the meal together, working side by side in the small cabin. Kade cleaned and cooked the fish while Winona made cornbread with some of the meal he had brought her. It felt domestic and comfortable, like something they had done 100 times before. After dinner, Kade produced a worn deck of cards from his pocket. "Do you play?" "My father taught me poker when I was young," Winona admitted, "though I am not sure if that is something a respectable woman should admit." "Good thing we are not in polite society then," Kade said with a grin. "Come on, I will deal." They played for matches, since neither had money to wager, and Winona discovered that Kade was a decent player, but she was better. She won 3 hands out of 5, and he laughed when she laid down a full house that beat his flush. "Your father taught you well," he said. "He had his moments," Winona agreed. As they played, the conversation turned more personal. Kade told her about the war, about things he had seen and done that still haunted him sometimes. Winona listened without judgment, understanding that he was sharing pieces of himself that he rarely showed anyone. In turn, she told him about the loneliness of caring for her father, about the slow loss of everything she had known, about the fear that had driven her west. "I was terrified when I arrived in Durango," she admitted. "I had no plan beyond finding the property, and even that was a gamble." "You are braver than you think," Kade said. "Coming out here alone, starting over from nothing, that takes courage or desperation. Sometimes they are the same thing." When Kade stood to leave that night, he lingered at the door. Winona stood close to him, looking up into his face, and she could see the war between caution and desire in his eyes. "Winona," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "All right. I have enjoyed these past 2 weeks more than I can properly express. Having you as a neighbor, getting to know you, it has been good, really good. I feel the same way. I do not want to rush you or make you uncomfortable. But I think you should know that my feelings are becoming more than just neighborly." Winona's heart hammered in her chest. "Mine too," she whispered. Kade reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face in his large, calloused hand. His thumb brushed her cheek gently, and Winona leaned into the touch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes." He bent down slowly, and his lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and intense. Winona's eyes fluttered closed, and she reached up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath her hands. The kiss deepened, and she felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the day I met you on that mountain trail. I wish you had done it sooner," Winona said, surprised by her own boldness. Kade laughed, a warm sound that rumbled through his chest. "I will make up for lost time." He kissed her again and again until they were both dizzy with it. When he finally forced himself to leave, promising to return the next day, Winona stood in the doorway and watched him disappear into the darkness with her fingers pressed to her lips. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Kade came by almost every day, sometimes to help with work that needed doing, sometimes just to visit. They took walks through the forest together, and he taught her about the plants and animals, which were edible and which were dangerous. He showed her how to fish in the creek, how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the sky for coming weather. Winona, in turn, did mending for him, sewed him a new shirt from fabric he brought from town, and cooked meals that they shared together. She found herself laughing more than she had in years, found joy in simple things like the way Kade's eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the rumble of his voice when he told stories by the fire. One afternoon in early October, Kade arrived with lumber and announced he was building Winona a proper bed frame and a second chair for her table. "You do not have to do that," she protested. "I know I do not have to. I want to." Watching you sleep on that bare frame has been bothering me for weeks." He worked through the afternoon, and by evening, she had a beautiful bed frame with rope supports that would hold a mattress much more comfortably. He also constructed a sturdy chair to match the one she already had. "Now you can have guests," he said with satisfaction. "I only ever have one guest," Winona pointed out, smiling. "Then you need a chair for me specifically." That night, they sat together in the two chairs, drinking tea and talking about the coming winter. "It gets hard up here," Kade warned. "Snow can pile up 6 feet deep. You will need to lay in supplies, lots of firewood, food that will keep, and you will need warmer clothes than what you have." "I can sew warmer clothes if I have the fabric. I will take you into town next week. You can get what you need." "Kade, I do not have money for supplies." He was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "I have been thinking about that. You are a skilled seamstress, right? People in Durango need sewing done, mending and alterations and such. If you could establish yourself, you could earn money." "That is a good idea, but I would need to get to town regularly, and I would need my own materials to start. I can loan you the money to get started. You pay me back when you can, no interest, no hurry." Winona shook her head. "You have already done so much for me. I cannot take more." "Then do not think of it as taking. Think of it as investing. I am investing in my neighbor's success because it benefits both of us. How does it benefit you?" Kade met her eyes directly. "Because I care about you, Winona. I want to see you succeed and thrive. That is benefit enough." The simple honesty of it made her throat tight. "I care about you too," she said softly. "I know, which is why I am asking you to let me help. Not because you cannot manage alone, but because you do not have to manage alone. You have me." Winona felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "All right, thank you." The next week, Kade drove her into Durango in his wagon. It was her first time back in town since she had arrived, and she was surprised by how much more comfortable she felt now. She was no longer a lost stranger with nowhere to go. She was a woman with a home and a purpose, and it showed in the way she carried herself. They went to the general store, and Kade helped her select fabric, thread, needles, and other supplies she would need. He paid for everything without hesitation, despite her continued protests, and arranged for her to leave notice that she was available for sewing work. Mrs. Patterson, the restaurant owner, was particularly enthusiastic. "Oh, bless you, dear. I have been needing someone to alter some dresses for weeks. When can you start?" "Whenever you need me," Winona said. "Bring them by tomorrow," Kade said. "Winona will have them done within a few days." Word spread quickly through town, and by the time they left Durango, Winona had commitments for 6 different jobs. It was not a fortune, but it was a start. On the ride back, Winona impulsively leaned over and kissed Kade's cheek. "Thank you for believing in me." Kade's face flushed slightly under his beard, and he smiled. "Always." That night, Kade stayed later than usual. They sat by the fire, Winona tucked against his side with his arm around her shoulders, and talked about everything and nothing. At some point, the conversation lapsed into comfortable silence, and Winona realized she had never felt so content in her entire life. "Winona," Kade said quietly, "I know we have not known each other very long, just a couple of months, but I need you to know that what I feel for you, it is real. It is not just loneliness or convenience. You have become important to me." Winona turned to look up at him. "You have become important to me too. More than important. I love you, Kade." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then Kade was kissing her fiercely, pouring all his emotion into the contact. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you too," he said roughly. "I have loved you since you asked my name on that mountain trail and looked at me like I was a person worth knowing." "You are worth knowing," Winona said. "You are worth everything." They kissed again, and the fire burned low while they lost themselves in each other. When Kade finally pulled away, his breathing was ragged. "I should go," he said, "before I do something that would not be proper." "What if I do not care about proper?" Winona asked boldly. Kade groaned. "You are not making this easy. I am not trying to make it easy. I am trying to tell you that I want you to stay. Winona, if I stay, I want to do this right. I want to marry you, make you my wife properly." Winona's heart soared. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am saying that I want to, if you would have me. I know I am just a mountain man without much to offer, but I would spend every day of my life making sure you are happy and safe and loved. You have more to offer than any man I have ever known, Winona said fiercely. And yes, I will marry you, whenever you want, however you want. Kade kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise. We will go into Durango next week and talk to the preacher. Do it right, with witnesses and everything legal. I do not need witnesses or legal documents to know I want to spend my life with you. I know. But I want everyone to know you are mine, and I am yours. I want it official. Winona laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. Then official it is. Kade did leave that night, though reluctantly, and Winona lay awake for hours replaying their conversation. She was going to marry Kade Kerrigan. The thought filled her with joy so intense it was almost painful. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Winona worked on the sewing jobs she had taken, and Kade continued preparing both their properties for winter. They made a trip into Durango and spoke with the preacher, a kind older man named Reverend Wallace, who agreed to perform the ceremony the following Sunday. It is a bit rushed, the Reverend said, but I can see you two are well suited. Sometimes you just know. We know, Kade confirmed, holding Winona's hand. Winona used some of the money she earned from sewing to purchase fabric for a simple wedding dress. It was not fancy, just a cream-colored cotton with some lace trim, but she worked on it carefully, putting all her skill into making it beautiful. The Sunday of their wedding dawned clear and cold, the first real hint of winter in the air. They were married in the small church in Durango, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband standing as witnesses. Winona wore her new dress and a wreath of dried wildflowers in her hair. Kade wore new trousers and a shirt she had made for him, and he had trimmed his beard neatly. When Reverend Wallace pronounced them husband and wife, Kade kissed her with such tenderness that Winona felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were tears of joy, of relief, of coming home to a place and a person she had not known she was searching for. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting a small celebration at her restaurant, and half the town seemed to show up to wish them well. Winona was overwhelmed by the kindness of these people who had been strangers just months ago. When they finally left Durango in the late afternoon, heading back up into the mountains, Winona felt like she was glowing from the inside out. "Where are we going?" she asked as Kade guided the wagon past the turnoff to her cabin. "My place," he said. "Our place now, I suppose. I figure you can move your things over gradually, but tonight I want my wife in my bed." The possessiveness in his tone sent a shiver through Winona that had nothing to do with the cold. They reached Kade's cabin as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Kade lifted Winona down from the wagon, but instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her to the door. "What are you doing?" she asked, laughing. "Carrying my bride over the threshold. It is tradition." He kicked the door open and carried her inside, setting her down gently by the fire. Then he turned and locked the door, shutting out the world. "Hello, wife," he said softly. "Hello, husband," Winona replied. They came together in a kiss that quickly turned heated. Kade's hands were gentle but insistent, and Winona responded with equal passion. They undressed each other slowly, exploring and learning, and when they finally came together fully, it was with a sense of rightness that transcended the physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Kade's bed, Winona's head on his chest and his arms wrapped securely around her. "I love you," Kade murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Winona replied, "more than I knew it was possible to love someone." "We are going to have a good life together," Kade said. "I promise you that. I know we will." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and Winona dreamed of the future they would build together. The winter that followed was hard, as Kade had warned. The snow piled up deep, and temperatures dropped below anything Winona had experienced in Kansas City. But inside their cabin, there was warmth and love and contentment. Winona moved her belongings from her old cabin to Kade's, and they decided to use her property for expansion, talking about building a larger barn and maybe getting some cattle in the spring. Kade taught her how to snowshoe, how to keep the paths clear, how to manage the constant work of winter survival. In the evenings, they sat by the fire together. Sometimes Winona sewed while Kade carved wood or repaired tools. Sometimes they just talked or read aloud to each other from the small collection of books Kade owned, and sometimes they simply held each other, needing no words. In late December, Winona realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another few weeks to be certain, then told Kade one evening as they prepared dinner. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Kade froze, the knife he was using to chop vegetables clattering to the table. "You are certain?" "Fairly certain. I have been feeling ill in the mornings, and it has been over 2 months since my last courses." Kade crossed the cabin in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Winona asked, though she could hear the joy in his voice. "Happy does not begin to cover it." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes bright. "You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father. We are going to be a family." "We are already a family," Winona pointed out, smiling. "True. But now we are going to be a bigger family." That night, Kade was extra gentle with her, as if she might break, and Winona had to laugh at his careful handling. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. I know, but still. I want to take care of you. You always take care of me." Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow melting gradually to reveal the brown earth beneath. As the weather warmed, Kade and Winona began working on expanding their property. They cleared more land for a larger garden, built a proper barn, and even acquired 2 cows and a handful of chickens beyond what Kade already had. Winona's belly swelled with the pregnancy, and Kade was endlessly fascinated by it. He would place his large hands on her stomach and wait to feel the baby kick, his face lighting up with wonder every time. "What do you hope for, boy or girl?" Winona asked one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset. Healthy," Kade said immediately. "That is all I care about. But if I am being honest, a son would be nice, someone to teach how to hunt and fish and survive up here. And if we have a daughter, then I will teach her all the same things, and she will be the toughest girl in Colorado." Winona laughed. "I love you. I love you too." In late September, as the leaves began to turn gold and red, Winona went into labor. Kade had arranged for Mrs. Patterson to come up from town to help with the delivery, and the older woman arrived just as the pains were getting intense. "You are doing fine, dear," Mrs. Patterson said soothingly as she helped Winona through the contractions. "First babies take their time, but you are strong. You can do this." Kade paced the cabin like a caged animal, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. Winona called him over during a brief respite from the pain. "Hold my hand," she said. "I need you." He gripped her hand, and when the next contraction came, she squeezed so hard she thought she might break his fingers. But Kade did not flinch, just murmured encouragement and wiped the sweat from her forehead. After hours of labor, as the sun set outside, their baby finally entered the world with a strong, lusty cry. "It is a boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, wrapping the baby in a clean cloth. "A fine, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Winona's arms, and Winona looked down at her son with tears streaming down her face. He was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. Kade knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of awe. "We made that," he said softly. "We made a person." "We did," Winona agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Kade reached out carefully and touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers wrapped around his father's finger instinctively. "How about Wyatt?" Kade suggested. "Means brave in battle. Seems fitting for a mountain baby." "Wyatt Kerrigan," Winona tested the name. "I love it."
"Hello, Wyatt. Welcome to the world."
Mrs. Patterson stayed for a few days to help Winona recover and learn how to care for the baby. By the time she left, Winona felt more confident, though still overwhelmed by the responsibility of this tiny life depending on her. Kade was a devoted father from the start. He got up in the night when Wyatt cried, walking the cabin floor with the baby against his broad chest, singing off key lullabies that made Winona smile. He changed diapers without complaint and spent hours just watching his son sleep, as if he could not quite believe this small person was real. As Wyatt grew, Kade built a cradle and later a small bed. He carved wooden toys and told stories about the animals in the forest, and when Wyatt took his first steps, it was toward his father's outstretched arms, Kade laughing with delight as he caught his son. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Winona's sewing business continued to thrive, with people from Durango and even further out seeking her services. She trained herself to be even faster and more skilled, and the money she earned helped them expand their property further. They acquired more livestock improved their cabins, and built a separate workshop where Winona could do her sewing. Kade continued hunting and trapping, but also began hiring himself out as a guide for wealthy hunters who came west seeking adventure. The combination of their efforts brought in enough income that they were comfortable, not wealthy, but secure. When Wyatt was 3, Winona became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1877, she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, and Kade was just as besotted with his tiny daughter as he had been with his son. "My Kade," he called her, and the little girl wrapped him around her finger from day one. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named James, and 3 years after that, a final daughter, whom they named Sarah. The cabin that had once housed just Kade now overflowed with the noise and chaos of 4 children. They expanded again, adding rooms and building a second story. What had started as a simple mountain cabin became a proper home, filled with laughter and love. On a warm summer evening in 1882, Winona sat on the porch watching the sunset while Kade played with the children in the yard. Wyatt, now 11, was teaching his younger siblings how to skip stones in the creek. Catherine was 8 and determined to throw farther than her big brother. James was 6 and kept losing his stones before he could throw them. Sarah, at 3, was mostly just throwing random rocks and giggling. Kade caught Winona watching and came over to sit beside her on the step, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. Deliriously, Winona replied, "Are you? More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her temple. "Do you ever think about that day on the mountain trail when we first met? Sometimes I was so scared and lost. I thought you were the bravest thing I had ever seen, heading into unknown territory all alone with nothing but determination." "I thought you were terrifying," Winona admitted. "This huge mountain man appearing out of nowhere. But then you helped me, and you kept helping me, and somewhere along the way I fell completely in love with you." "I fell in love with you the moment you thanked me by name," Kade said. "Nobody had called me by my name in months. Everyone in town just called me the mountain man or that hermit. But you saw me as a person. You are the best person I know. I am the luckiest person I know. I have you, I have our children, I have this life we built together. It is more than I ever dreamed of having." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun sank below the mountains. Later, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Kade and Winona lay together in their room, talking quietly. "Do you ever miss Kansas City?" Kade asked. "Not even a little," Winona said honestly. "That life feels like it belonged to someone else. This is where I am meant to be. With me, with you, always with you." Kade pulled her closer, and Winona rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, an owl hooted, and the wind whispered through the pines. Inside, there was warmth and safety and love. "Remember when you built that outhouse for me?" Winona said suddenly. "Before I even had to ask for help. I remember. That was when I knew you were the one. Not just because of the outhouse itself, though that was certainly practical, but because you saw what I needed and took care of it without being asked. You have been doing that our entire marriage, anticipating what I need, what our family needs, and making sure we have it. That is what love is," Kade said simply, "taking care of each other. You have taken such good care of us, and you have made my life worth living. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, gave me joy, you gave me everything." Winona lifted her head to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the contact. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I am so grateful I took that wrong turn on the mountain trail," Winona said. "If I had found the main road, I would have ridden right past your life and never known what I was missing." "Fate," Kade said, "or luck. Or maybe you were just meant to find me. I like that idea that we were meant to find each other." "Me too." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease of long familiarity mixed with enduring passion. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Winona thought about all the unlikely events that had brought her to this moment. Her father's death, sad as it was, had freed her to seek a new life. The property he won in a card game had given her a destination. The wrong turn on the trail had brought her to Kade. Every hardship, every struggle had led her here to this man and this life and this overwhelming happiness. In the morning, Wyatt burst into their room at dawn, as he often did, climbing into bed between them. "Papa, can we go fishing today? You promised." "I did promise." Kade agreed, ruffling his son's hair. "Go wake your sister. She wanted to come too." Wyatt scrambled away, and moments later they heard him trying to convince Catherine to get up. Kade looked at Winona with amusement. "No rest for the parents," he said. "I would not trade it for all the rest in the world," Winona replied. They rose and started their day, moving through the familiar routines of breakfast and chores. James helped Kade gather the fishing gear, while Catherine packed a lunch. Sarah clung to Winona's skirts, not wanting to be left behind. "You are too small for fishing, sweet pea," Winona said gently. "You and I will have a special day here, just us." "Story?" Sarah asked hopefully. "All the stories you want." The fishing party departed mid-morning, Kade with his 3 older children trailing behind him like ducklings. Winona watched them go with a smile, then spent the day with Sarah, telling stories and baking bread and working on a new dress. When the fishermen returned in the late afternoon, they brought a string of trout and tales of Wyatt catching the biggest one. Catherine complained that her brothers had scared all the fish away from her spot. James proudly displayed a scraped knee from climbing rocks. They were sunburned and happy and loud. Winona cooked the trout for dinner, and they ate together at the large table Kade had built, everyone talking over each other in the way of families who are comfortable together. After dinner, Kade read to the younger children while Wyatt helped Winona clean up. "Mama," Wyatt said thoughtfully as he dried dishes, "do you think I will live in the mountains like Papa when I grow up?" "Do you want to?" Winona asked. "I think so. I love it here. I love the forest and the animals and our home." "Then you probably will, but you have many years to decide." "Did you always know you wanted to live here?" "No," Winona said honestly. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. But once I arrived, once I met your father, I knew I had found where I belonged." "Because you loved Papa?" "Yes, because I loved your Papa, and because this land, as hard as it can be, felt right. It felt like home." Wyatt nodded seriously, absorbing this. "I think our family is lucky. I think so too." That night, after the children were all asleep, Kade and Winona sat outside on the porch as had become their habit. The stars blazed overhead, and the night air was cool and crisp. "Wyatt asked me today if he would live in the mountains when he grows up," Winona said. "What did you tell him?" "That he has time to decide, but if he loves it here, then yes, he probably will." "I hope they all stay close," Kade said quietly. "Not living in our pockets, but nearby. I like the idea of our family staying connected. We have built something good here, something worth staying for." "We have," Kade agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you remember that first night after we met, when you slept on the street in Durango because you had no money?" "Of course I remember. I cried myself to sleep." "If you could go back and tell that scared young woman what her life would become, what would you say?" Winona thought about it. "I would tell her to hold on, that help is coming, that she is going to meet a man who will change everything, who will love her fiercely and build her an outhouse before she even has to ask, that she is going to have a family and a home and more happiness than she knew existed. And I would tell her that every hardship she is enduring is leading her to exactly where she needs to be." Kade pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I would go back to that lonely mountain man and tell him that his life is about to get infinitely better, that a woman with dark hair and determined eyes is going to walk into his world and fill all the empty spaces, that he is going to be a husband and a father and happier than he ever imagined possible." "We were both lost," Winona said softly, "and we found each other." "Best thing I ever found," Kade murmured. "Best thing I ever found, too." They sat together under the stars, two people who had been alone and struggling, who had found each other against all odds and built a life of love and purpose. Behind them, their children slept safely in the home they had created. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and protective, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Wyatt grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and trap and survive in the wilderness. Catherine developed her mother's skill with needle and thread, but also insisted on learning everything her brother learned, refusing to be left behind because she was a girl. James was quieter than his siblings, preferring books to hunting, and Kade built him shelves for the small library he was accumulating. Sarah remained the baby, adored by everyone and growing up fearless. In the winter of 1886, when Wyatt was 15, tragedy struck the mountains. A massive blizzard rolled in with little warning, dumping snow faster than anyone could manage. Several families closer to town lost livestock, and one older couple nearly froze to death before neighbors could reach them. The Kerrigan family weathered the storm safely, well supplied and experienced with harsh winters. But the aftermath brought opportunity. The town council asked Kade to help organize a system of check-ins for the more isolated families during winter months, recognizing his skills and knowledge. Kade agreed, and Wyatt began accompanying his father on these welfare checks, learning responsibility and the importance of community. It was dangerous work sometimes, traveling in harsh conditions, but it was also necessary, and Winona was proud of both her husband and her son for taking it on. That spring, a new family moved into the area, taking over an abandoned homestead about 5 miles from the Kerrigan property. They had a daughter named Emily who was close to Wyatt's age, and Winona noticed her son's sudden interest in combing his hair more carefully before going into town. "Our boy is growing up," she said to Kade one evening. "I noticed. He asked me yesterday how to talk to girls. What did you tell him?" "I told him to treat them like people and be honest, same way I won you." Winona laughed. "That is good advice." Over the next few years, they watched Wyatt court Emily with the same steady patience Kade had shown Winona. When Wyatt turned 18, he asked his father's permission to marry Emily, and Kade gave it gladly. The wedding was held at the Kerrigan property, with half of Durango in attendance. It was a joyous celebration, and Winona cried happy tears watching her firstborn pledge his life to someone who clearly adored him. Wyatt and Emily built a cabin on the southern portion of the original property Winona had inherited, the land that had started everything. They were close enough to visit regularly, but had their own space to build their own life. "How does it feel to have your son married?" Kade asked Winona that night after the celebration ended. "Strange," Winona admitted. "Wonderful, but strange. He was just a baby, and now he is a man with a wife. Time moves faster than we realize. Soon Catherine will be married, then James, then Sarah. Don't remind me, I am not ready for that." But ready or not, time continued its march. Catherine, true to her independent spirit, announced at 17 that she wanted to go to Denver to study at a women's college. It was an unexpected decision that shocked the whole family. "I love the mountains," Catherine explained, "but I want to see what else is out there. I want to learn things I cannot learn here." It was Kade who encouraged her to go, despite Winona's reservations. "She has your courage," he said to Winona. "Let her explore. She will come back if this is where she belongs, and if she does not, then we raised her to make her own choices." Catherine went to Denver, and the house felt emptier without her fierce energy. But she wrote letters regularly, and they visited when they could. She did well at school, thriving in the academic environment, and eventually became a teacher herself. James, at 16, surprised nobody by announcing he wanted to work in the general store in Durango, surrounded by books and supplies, rather than living in the wild. He moved to town and took an apprenticeship, visiting home on Sundays. Only Sarah remained at home, and at 12 years old, she was content there. She loved helping her mother with sewing and cooking, loved riding through the mountains with her father, loved the life they had built. One evening in 1895, Winona and Kade found themselves alone in the house for the first time in over 20 years. All the children were grown or nearly so, living their own lives. "It is so quiet," Winona said, almost bewildered by it. "Is it strange that I miss the noise?" Kade asked. "Not at all, I miss it too." They adjusted to their empty nest, rediscovering the companionship that had started their relationship. They took long walks together, spent evenings reading aloud to each other, and made love with the freedom of not having to worry about children hearing. But the house did not stay empty for long. Wyatt and Emily had their first child, a boy they named Thomas after Winona's father. Suddenly, Kade and Winona were grandparents, and a new chapter of their lives began. Winona held her grandson and felt the circle of life completing itself. The scared young woman who had arrived in Durango with nothing was now a grandmother, surrounded by family, secure in a love that had endured decades. "He looks like you," Kade said, peering at the baby. He looks like Wyatt. Same thing, Wyatt looks like you. Winona laughed, and the baby stirred at the sound. She rocked him gently, and Kade wrapped his arms around both of them. We did good, he said softly. The years rolled on. More grandchildren arrived as their children married and started families. Catherine eventually returned from Denver with a husband, a professor who fell in love with the mountains as deeply as she had. James married a girl from town and took over the general store when the owner retired. Sarah married a young rancher and moved about 10 miles south but visited often. Kade and Winona grew older together, their hair going gray, their bodies moving more slowly. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, tempered by time and trial, into something unbreakable. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1902, their entire family gathered at the mountain property for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and yard, and Winona looked around at all these people who existed because she and Kade had found each other and felt overwhelming gratitude. Kade pulled her aside during the celebration, leading her away from the crowd to a quiet spot by the creek. It was the same creek that ran through her original property, the same water that had sustained them for 3 decades. I wanted a moment with just you, he said, before we get too old to have moments alone. We are already old, Winona teased. Speak for yourself. I am still in my prime. She laughed, the sound as bright as it had been when she was 22. What did you want to say? Kade took her hands in his grip still strong despite his age. I wanted to thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for building this life with me, for giving me children and grandchildren and more love than I knew what to do with. You took a broken, lonely man and made him whole. You were never broken, Winona said fiercely. You were just waiting, and I should be thanking you. You saved me, Kade. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You loved me when I felt unlovable. You built me an outhouse before I had to ask, and that was when I knew you were the one. Kade laughed. Of all the romantic gestures I have made over the years, you keep coming back to the outhouse, because it was perfect, it was practical and thoughtful and exactly what I needed. It was you, through and through. And I have loved you every day since. I have loved you every day since I saw you on that mountain trail, looking scared but determined. You are the bravest person I know. We made each other brave, Winona said. That is what love does. They kissed, soft and sweet, and when they returned to the celebration, their grandchildren demanded to know where they had gone. Just taking a walk, Kade said. Remembering. Remembering what, Grandpa? One of the youngest asked. Remembering how lucky we are. As the sun set that evening, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, the family gathered for a photograph. Kade and Winona sat in the center, surrounded by their 4 children, their children's spouses, and a dozen grandchildren. Everyone was laughing and talking, and the photographer had to shout to get them to hold still. When the photograph was developed weeks later, Winona framed it and hung it over the fireplace. It became her most treasured possession, physical proof of the life they had built together. Kade lived to be 73 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1914. Winona held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering that she loved him, that she would see him again. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Colorado. Kade had become a pillar of the mountain community, respected and loved by everyone who knew him. But for Winona, the loss was devastating. They had been together for 42 years, and the world without him felt impossibly empty. She stayed in the mountain cabin, refusing her children's offers to move in with them. This was her home, hers and Kade's, and she would not leave it. Her grandchildren visited often, and eventually great-grandchildren began arriving, and life continued around her even as she mourned. At night, she would sit in Kade's rocking chair by the fire and talk to him as if he were still there. She told him about the children, about the changes in town, about the ache in her heart that never quite went away. I miss you, she would say to the empty room. Every single day, I miss you. But she also remembered the joy. She remembered laughter and love and all the beautiful moments they had shared. She remembered the day he built her that outhouse, the day he first kissed her, the day they married, the births of their children, the quiet evenings watching the sunset. Winona Davies Kerrigan lived to be 89 years old, a remarkable age for someone who had lived such a hard but full life. When she passed in 1936, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were, "Tell your grandfather I am coming home." They buried her next to Kade on the mountain property, under the pines they had both loved. The headstones were simple: Kade Kerrigan, 1841–1914, beloved husband, father; grandfather Winona Davies Kerrigan, 1850–1936, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. But the true memorial to their love was not the stones. It was the family that continued to thrive, generation after generation. It was the stories passed down of the mountain man who helped a lost young woman and then spent his life loving her. It was the property itself, still in the family, still cherished. On summer evenings, when the sun set over the mountains and the creek burbled its eternal song, people said you could sometimes see two figures walking together through the trees, hand in hand: a tall, broad-shouldered man with long hair and a woman in a simple dress, her dark braid over her shoulder. No one knew if the stories were true, but they liked to believe that Kade and Winona were still together, still walking their beloved mountains, still in love after all these years. Because some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime. Some loves echo through the ages, inspiring others and proving that two people, if they are brave enough and fortunate enough to find each other, can build something that lasts forever. And it all started with a wrong turn on a mountain trail, a helping hand from a stranger, and an outhouse built before it was even requested, because real love means taking care of each other in all the small, practical ways that matter most.